So this will be part 2 of the build trick series. So last video we discussed the build trick's history, its method, its presentation, and the overall flaws that I had with the effect. So I gave you guys a week to sort of ponder on those flaws and think about how you would address them. Just based on your current knowledge and your sort of ideas as a performer, right? Now it's time for me to give my thoughts on the plot. But again, I tried not too hard to change the overall method of the effect, so everything mechanics-wise will work or will be the exact same. The only thing that I changed is sort of the general structure of the effect and the choreography and the presentation. Again, this is mainly because I didn't want to like overstep my bounds and like maybe like step on someone's toes for the build trick, but also because I just want to show you guys that presentation, choreography, and structure, those are the things that make the most amount of difference from effect to effect, right? From handling to handling, right? Everyone can take a method and then just change it, right? It's really nothing that's too special, right? But if you take the same method, you could still have so many different you can still like streamline it just based on just things like structure, choreography, and all that stuff. So really this is just sort of an I guess it's sort of just like a reminder or sort of refresher course on for people that structure, choreography, and presentation are 90% of magic effects, right? Method is again like the very, very like 10% of what makes an effect, right? So those are the important things that I want to point out. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So first off, let's recap all the flaws that I had with the effect. One, it's not really that impressive. We're trying to find the spectator's card from a group of 5 cards, right? And we're trying to find it via just guessing the card, right? If we're just guessing for the card, that's still a 20% chance to just guess the card correctly, right? Anyone can do that. You don't even have to be a magician to guess which one of these is their selection, right? So it's really not that impressive plot-wise. And if you're a magician and they've seen you perform, well, they've seen you perform things like finding a card with just a snap of your fingers, or with a magic word, or you can even change one card from one to another, right? So framing the effect as just you guessing their selection from a group of 5, it's just not really that impressive, and it's just not that exciting either, right? It's a guessing game. It's just not fun, right? So that's my first problem. That's the first main flaw that I had with the effect. It's just not that impressive of a presentation. The second thing about the effect is that this actually creates inconsistencies with your character and previous capabilities as a performer, right? So why do you have to suddenly guess their card? Why do you have to suddenly guess their card? If you really think about it, right? Things like the ambitious card, right? Ambitious card, you could show the card around, right? Or do whatever. How am I flashing this? Right? So you do, right? The ambitious card, let's just say, for example, like you show a card around, right? And then have someone snap their fingers or whatever, you do a pass, and then it's on top, right? So they've seen you like maybe do things like snap your fingers and suddenly their selection is back on top of the deck, right? They've seen like things like you changing cards with just a wave of the hands, right? So suddenly the fact that you have to guess is just really, really bizarre, right? Because if you could do all of those amazing things and with just a snap of your fingers, with just a wave, why do you suddenly have to guess, right? Because remember, most of the time when you're performing an effect, this will be face down. The deck will be face down. So when you're guessing, right? When you're guessing their selection from a group of 5, why do you suddenly have to turn all these cards face up and they have to guess which one is theirs, right? It's just doesn't make sense, and it sort of creates inconsistencies with what you as a magician can do and what like it sort of contradicts like what your capabilities are as a performer, right? It's like you can change cards with a snap of your fingers, but now you have to guess what their selection is. it degrades your character to some amount, right? And the last flaw is more of a structure, presentational, or method related flaw. So the thing about the Biddle trick is that you have to cut the deck in half, right? You have to cut the deck in half. So then when you do the Biddle move, right? When you do the Biddle move, you have to you can just put the deck on top, and that's that, right? You have completed the Biddle move. Right, so for the Biddle trick, you have to cut the deck in half. It's a necessity. Now, this creates obviously some questions in the spectator's mind, right? Why would you just not display the 5 cards away from the rest of the deck, right? Why would you just not do this? Why would you have to put these cards on top of the deck and then just show them one by one? That's a really weird sort of thing to have, right? And then suddenly you're putting it back down. So it's one of those instances where an effect is dictated by the method, right? If you really think about overall, the Biddle trick is an effect that's governed by its method, right? Because at no point this makes sense. At no point does having 5 cards on top of a packet make sense while the rest of the deck makes sense. Obviously, there's different sort of presentations that try and justify it, but this also makes no sense. So it's why is one packet separate from the other, and it's just overall a very, very bizarre approach, right? Traditionally, when you actually have a magic plot, right, you would have the presentation, the plot first, right, and then you would develop the method around it. And even then, like, you would try and find at least a compromise where, because obviously we're, at the end of the day, we're human. We can't necessarily change matter, change cards, right? We have to find compromises. But cutting the deck in half and then displaying the cards one by one is not necessarily a good compromise, because there are better ways to actually just insert the selection into the center deck, but this is just the most common one, and it doesn't really make much sense. Right? So those are the 3 main problems I have with the effect. Now obviously there are other problems that I have, but these are just the main ones. So how do we approach this effect while still maintaining the same core method? Obviously we'll have to change up the presentation and the choreography and just the overall structure of the effect. So I've noticed that part of the a huge part of actually the effect is actually very magician focused. Right? It's about you as the magician guessing their selection, right? Which is fine, but again, this creates some discrepancies with your character. So what if it actually became a lot more spectator focused? What if it was actually the spectator guessing and trying to find their own card again, right? That would be interesting. Right? So because this effect will be a lot more spectator focused, it'll be hard for me to do a performance, mainly because, well, I don't really have anyone else with me. So I'll have to present everything the best I can here, right? So ideally, when you're performing this handling, the spectator is seated across from you, right? Directly in front of you. So you're gonna have a card selected, and the original method actually had you force the selection, but that's actually not really necessary. As long as you know the selection's identity, then that's completely fine. This means that you can have a free selection. So as long as you employ things like maybe like key cards, glimpses, or if you really want to stick with the original method, forces, a marked deck, or even crimps, right? So yeah, because the main reason why a force was actually employed in the original effect was to actually just keep track of which card was their selection. That was the only reason why this effect actually employed a force. Otherwise, anything else that kept track of the selection would have been completely fine as well, right? So as long as you know the card's identity, it would have been completely fine. Personally, I would just go for crimps. And the reason why I would actually just go for a crimp is because the crimp has one distinct advantage over every other over every other method, right? You can have the spectators just take the deck, shuffle it, right? And without even looking through the cards with just a squared up deck, because a crimp is inherently just a bend in the cards, you can actually tell where their selection is, right? And you don't even have to look through the cards to tell which one is their selection, right? You don't have to look through the faces to tell. So that's one distinct advantage that crimps offer versus every other sort of way of keeping track of their selection, right? So to get a crimp is extremely simple. You're gonna have a card selected, right? So let's just say it's the 5 of diamonds. The spectator can show it around or do whatever they need with it, right? As they return the selection back to the deck and you're gonna close the spread, what you're going to do is that underneath of the spread, so underneath the spread, I'll just remove the spread. As you actually close the deck, as you close the spread on top of the selection, right? So the overall motion is just this, right? That should just be the overall motion, but without the deck. So as you actually just go to close the spread on top of the selection, what you're going to do is that your ring finger actually just contacts this bottom right corner of the deck of the selection over here, and actually just applies a bit of pressure, and this causes this selection to actually just bend downwards like so, and this actually crimps the card. Now you can see that there's actually a downward crimp over here, right? So this is just an ordinary corner crimp, right? I'll do it with an ace of spades, just so then it's easier to keep track of. So over here, and if you're using an older deck, you can actually apply a bit more pressure, just so then this sticks out a bit more, right? So now we have a crimp on the ace of spades. So now we know exactly where our ace of spades is, right? Because there's actually a downward bend, so we actually just pick it up from the corner over here. Our ace of spades, it's right over here, right? So again, it's just a gentle push down as you close the spread on top of this selection, right? And over here. So now you can actually just hand the deck out for the spectator to shuffle, right? You can hand the deck out for the spectator to shuffle, right? Usually they'll just do an overhand shuffle, which is fine, right? Which is actually better because then they don't look through the corners. They just sort of just do whatever that they need. But now, when they actually hand the deck back to you, you're now aware of where their selection is because of the crimp, and you don't, but you still don't know what the identity of the selection is. But that's completely fine, because for this next phase, which is the first major change for the structure of the effect, you only need to know the position, the general position of the selection, right? It's just over here, right? So, like I said, I pointed out that the Biddle trick is often the magician guessing which card is the spectator's. But what if we flip that narrative around? So now that the spectator shuffled the deck, neither I or them know where their card is, right? So now, in this context, you can actually frame it as, oh, wouldn't it be the perfect opportunity for them to just try and find their own card, right? So we can frame it as sort of just making the magician, or making the spectator the magician, right? Giving the spectator a backstage view as to how it is as being a magician, right? So that's how you would actually just frame this. Like, okay, so it would be very easy for me to find your selection in this deck of 52. But what if you found it, right? Because again, you selecting this card was just a 1 in a 52 chance. What are the chances of you actually finding your own card once more? Or something along those lines, right? Just something that would actually get the spectator to participate, to just pull them in, right? So you're basically just going to have them magic their way through and find their own card. That's basically what the new sort of premise is, right? But obviously, for this effect to work, you have to have control over at least half of the deck and their selection, right? So what you're going to do is that you're actually just going to split the deck in half, right? So we're going to split the deck in half early on. We're going to split the deck in half right now. And what you're going to do is that you're going to keep the half with their selection, and their half, right, the half without their selection, you're just going to give it to the spectator. Okay? And for this particular context, you can frame it as, okay, it's your first time maybe performing an effect and all that stuff. So you know what? Me as the expert, I'll help you. I'll also lend you a hand for this. All right. So I'll do exactly what you do, and that's completely fine, right? So obviously we have the part with their selection because of the crimp, so that tells us exactly where their selection is, and we're going to be the ones who are keeping this selection. Okay. So now that we framed it as basically us helping them find their card, right? Because it's their first time performing magic. So basically what we're going to do is that we're giving them the responsibility of finding their own card, right? Because originally when we were performing the Biddle trick, it's us responsible for guessing their card, which is fine, but also again, we're framing it as guessing their selection, which I've never been really a big fan of. So now it has to be the spectator's turn to guess their own selection. But of course, we're under the guise of helping them, guiding them through the effect. We're actually going to insert ourselves into the equation and guide the plot along as well, right? So splitting the deck in this instance is a presentational thing where it's, oh, I'm going to help you, but it's also a method-based thing where we retain control of the selection over here, right? So it serves two purposes. So now the spectator has one half of the deck, the one without the selection, and then we have the other half with the selection, right? So now, again, using the premise that's the spectator's first time doing magic, frame it as you'll give them multiple chances to find their card, and you'll also help them as well, right? Say that maybe they get 2 chances and you'll get 2 chances, okay? So now under that guise, they'll just spread through the deck and they'll pull out 2 random cards, right? Obviously, neither of these will be their selection. They're just 2 random cards. But when you're actually going to do the same thing, when you're actually going to help them to mimic them, to pull out these 2 cards, you're going to go here, you're going to take out a different card, right? And you're also going to have to take out their selection, right? So their selection is obviously on the bottom over here, so you can have your pinky actually just pull down on that crimp, right? Because remember, a crimp over here is actually just a little downwards bend. So my pinky can actually just pull down on that downwards bend, and this causes the selection to actually be on top over here, right? So I can just pull down on this and now know exactly where the selection is. So I can spread through the deck, upjog 1 random card, and then spread to where the break is and upjog the card below it, which is their selection, okay? So now I have 1 indifferent card, their selection, and the spectator also has 2 random cards, okay? So this will be a Biddle move that is done with 4 cards, as opposed to the traditional 5 cards, okay? So now you're just gonna toss the cards on table, face down, and the spectator is going to do the exact same, right? You're gonna have the spectator sort of just keep the deck in their hand, keep their packet in the hands, and we don't really mention it over here. So now that we have sort of just a pile of cards, you can just, again, right, we have our crimp over here, right? We have our crimp card here. You actually just give the cards a little mix, doesn't really matter. As long as the crimp card doesn't end up face down on top of the packet, then it's completely fine, okay? So now I know for a fact that it is second from the top just because it is slightly bent. So this causes this card to be visible from this packet over here, right? So it's just a very, very slight bend over here. So now that you have this, what you're going to do is you're going to have to justify why these cards are going to go on top of this packet, because it's time for the Biddle move, right? So what you're going to do is that you're going to have to keep your right hand occupied to some capacity, right? So what we're going to do is that your right hand, if you want, can gesture to something, right? It can also take the spectator's hand, because at this point the spectator is holding onto the packet, right? It can take their spectator's hand and just pull them slightly closer, right? Just whatever sort of gets your right hand occupied, right? It can be a gesture, it can be just sort of pulling the spectator's hand a bit closer, and by extension the packet a bit closer. And as you actually do that motion, this occupies your right hand. So now you can't take both packets. So now you can't use your right hand to actually just pick up this packet, right? There's an excuse for your right hand to be occupied. So now that you only have one hand free, this means that it has to be your left hand who does the motion, right? So now this justifies it by having your left hand turn down and just scoop up these 4 cards, right? Because your right hand is occupied, I can't like do 2 things at once, or I can't like have my right hand be in 2 places at once. So I have to have my left hand scoop up these cards, right? Because realistically, I'm not gonna do this, right? If for the ease of everything, I would just do this. But because my right hand is occupied, I'm not gonna just like do whatever, right? So so that's the general reason as to why like I'm doing something with my right hand. It's so that I can justify having this left hand scoop up the cards on the table. And I realized that it's a very, very small thing, right? It's a very small thing to just have your left hand scoop up the cards and your right hand guiding everything. But I do think, again, because I didn't want to change the core method that much for this handling, I needed to find a reason as to why these cards would end up on top of this packet, right? And the reason why is, I just explained it, is because my right hand's occupied, my left hand needs to do something at the same time, and so that's the reason why. And now, because you grab the spectator's hand a bit closer, what you're going to do is that you're actually just going to do the Biddle move as per usual, right? And because of the crimp card, I know exactly which one of these is their card, right? I just bought the one with the bend, and I know exactly which one is theirs, right? So here, right, I'm just going to do the exact same thing as I usually do for a Biddle trick. So 2 of diamonds, ace of hearts. And now I know this is their card because there's a bend in it. And as I pull down this card, break, right? As I go to gesture to the 4 of clubs, that's when I do the Biddle move. So transfer this card to the bottom of this packet and peel off this card, right? So once you're done displaying these cards, you're going to take this packet and you're going to put it on top of the spectator's hand, right? On top of the packet that's in their spectator's hand. So again, this is just a follow-up to me taking their hand and just pulling it slightly closer, right? So now there's a reason why my right hand inherently was occupied pulling their hand closer while my left hand was scooping these cards up again. Okay, so this all contributes to the overall sort of thing, right? Just because I had to pull their hand closer, because I had to square up the deck, right? Because obviously I'm not going to keep an entire packet of cards this entire time, right? You want the deck to be complete again, right? So that's the general idea of why I would actually have my right hand pull their hand closer. So now obviously we're just going to go with the standard Biddle trick procedure, right? So immediately after you're done displaying the 4 cards, your eyes are actually just going to drift down and look at the packet of 4 cards, right? And you're actually going to verbally call attention to these and just be like, okay, just to confirm that we actually managed to pick out your card, right? Because remember, your spectator actually played a role in picking out one of 2 of these cards, right? So if the team actually, so the team being the spectator and you, if you guys actually managed to pick out like their selection, that's actually very impressive. And they don't know if it was you or them who actually managed to pick out their card, because again, you shuffled the cards, right? You shuffled the packet of the packet of 4 cards on the table, so then they don't really know if it's them who picked it out or you who picked it out, right? So now you got them to confirm, oh, did you actually manage to find your card? Then that's completely fine. It also makes them turn their attention away from this deck, right? Because throughout this entire time, when you were just grabbing their hand, when you were actually putting this packet on top of the, when you were actually completing the deck, all of this was actually just nonchalant. All of these actions were done off to the side because your attention was on these cards. All of your right hand actions were actually just off to the side, and you never really called attention to them, right? You just did them because you had to focus your attention on these. So you never pay attention to really what's going on with the rest of the deck, right? So now that you have, right, their attention focused on these 4 cards, you can either do the standard build trick procedure, which is just turning these cards face down and just saying, oh, now we have 4 cards in our packet, right? Or, which I don't really like, because then the next phase I have to turn the packet back face up again, which I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of. So honestly, I would just keep this packet face up. And the reason why I would just keep this packet face up is you just displayed these cards. You just displayed 4 cards. Why would you ever need to turn the packet back face down and then just count them out again and then turn it back face up? That's a lot more procedure than necessary, right? Because remember, you literally just showed 4 cards. There's no reason why you should, again, justify it. That's a lot of overproving, right? So if you turn your attention and just say, okay, so your card is amongst this packet of 4, which is perfect, right? Like, okay, so we managed to find or pick out your card amongst these 4 cards, right? Which is perfect. And now, again, since this is a presentation where the spectator gets the power, you're going to take this packet of 4 cards and you're just going to place them on top of the deck, which is where they're keeping their card, which is where they're keeping the deck, right? So this is the only time that we're really putting some focus on the deck, right? Just because their card is now on face up on top of the deck over here, right? And then from here, you can actually ask the spectator to actually just take their other hand and just cover the top of the deck over here. And then you can just ask them, okay, so if you're a magician, where would you hide your card? Where would you do something like that? Or maybe you could ask them like, okay, so I want you to imagine, right, that you're actually taking your own card and you're actually just putting it maybe a bit deeper, right? Imagine that maybe you just stole your card right now, and then you just tossed it back in the deck, because that's what I would do as a magician, right? Or whatever presentation that would sort of justify why their card would sort of end up in the center of the deck, right? You can have your character be like a mischievous character, right? Being like, oh, imagine that you, as the magician, you suddenly stole your card imperceptibly, and sort of do something like that, right? And now we can ask the spectator so the spectator can mime whatever action that they want, right? And now from there, you can ask the spectator to sort of just remove their hand, right? They can themselves, again, at this point, the deck is in their hand. At this point, they can then spread through the cards, revealing that the cards that were on top of the deck is now only 3 cards. And then they can spread through the cards and show that, oh, their actions have actually caused their selection to sink down into the deck, away from these 3 cards, into the center of the deck, right? Okay, so now that you're done watching the explanation for the structure and sort of presentation of the build trick, you have to wonder why then make those particular changes. So let's go through the changes one by one. One is obviously the presentation. Why change the presentation of the effect? In most presentations of the build trick, it's always the magician guessing the spectator's card, which leads to 2 main flaws, right? It's really not that impressive, and there's a mismatch between the magician's capabilities, right? By framing it as more the spectator guessing their own card, you can basically circumvent those 2 flaws, because now you're not the one guessing their card. It's the spectator guessing and trying to find their own card, right? And you can also maintain some control over the effect just based on the fact that you're the main performer who's just helping them, who's just guiding them and mentoring them to be a magician for once, right? To give them a behind the scenes view of magic, right? So in this instance, I think the presentation, that's the main reason why I made the presentational changes, right? So it's just so then it feels like there's less of a discrepancy with your character. The second change that I made is the crimp, right? Like I said in the explanation section, the crimp is, the crimp instead of the force gives you multiple benefits, right? You don't need to glimpse the card before and then force it after, right? Because that's 2 moves. That's 2 moves, and it's really 2 moves too many, right? You don't really need to do those 2 moves because, again, the main point of the force in the effect was to mainly just know what their selection was. But there are other ways to keep track and know what their selection is. So there was really no need to actually just peek the card and then force it later, right? If you use a crimp or use a key card or use a marked deck, the selection can be a free choice. And it can be a free choice, and if you use a crimp, you can also keep track of the selection, right? You can keep track of the selection even though the deck is shuffled multiple times and cut and done whatever, right? So having the card crimped instead of forced gives you those advantages, right? So if I have my ace of spades in the deck, right, I can give it a series of cuts, doesn't really matter, shuffle, more cuts, and I can still tell exactly that their card is over here, right? So that's one distinct advantage as to why I prefer using crimps over the force in this instance, right? The third change that I made is just giving the spectator half of the deck, right? By giving the spectator half a deck, you're playing into the presentation of, oh, I'm the one who's going to be guiding you to be a magician in this one effect, right? And you're also giving a reason as to why the deck would be separated in the first place, right? Because to guess for their card, the spectator needs the deck. But you, as the spectator's magical guide, you also need the deck to show them how things are done. And since both characters involved in this effect need the deck, it makes sense why you would have to split the deck, right? Because I'm not just gonna like air mime or do whatever, right? I can, but you're also supposed to be helping them, right? You're supposed to be helping them. In that way, you can have the justification to keep half a deck, right? You're the one who's showing them the ropes. You're the one who's showing them how it's done. And in that instance, you're the one who can in that instance you can actually maintain control over half of the packet, right? The fourth change was the scooping motion, right? Again, you're just haphazardly tossing the cards onto whatever, right? Maybe it's in their hand again, doesn't really matter. So you're just haphazardly tossing the guest cards onto the table, so they're messy, right? You'll need a hand to scoop them up and display them, right? If it was just these 4 cards, perfect. I can just, if it was just these 4 cards and my hands were free, perfect. I could just take them and then just display them, right? That would be perfect. But in this instance, both of my hands are doing something. My left hand is holding the deck, holding my half of the packet. My right hand is guiding their deck hand closer, right? So now, this leaves me with only one option, which is to use my left hand to scoop the 4 cards up, right? And having the cards actually, having this left hand actually scoop up these 4 cards automatically places these cards face up, right? So now I don't have to do any weird thing of taking all these cards, flipping them face up. Now it automatically becomes face up just from this one scooping motion. Okay, so that's something that I decided to do. Okay, and so those are the reasons as to why I decided to make those changes to the Biddle trick, right? And again, ideally, I would actually just use an entirely different method for the effect, But if I only had access to the most basic of tools and had to preserve the Bellatrix core moves, this would be how I would personally approach it, right? Just changing up the structure, the choreography, and the presentation of the effect. So there are many other build tricks published in the Magic world. So if you are interested more in other people's handlings of the build trick, you can of course look at Biddle by Cody. Why is it Cody? That's a fish. But Cody Nottingham and Think Nguyen. So that's Biddle. Alakazam Unlimited, which is Alakazam Magic's subscription service. There's one build trick by John Carey in that service. There's Fringe by Max Lukian and Giacomo Bigliardi. So there, it's a gimmicked variation of the build trick, but it is extremely clean. And I think that you guys would overall enjoy the gimmick that those two actually present. So make sure to check those out. There's also Card College Volume 3 by Roberto Giobbi. That's where the original build trick that I taught was published. So yeah, that's where you can actually look at way more effects and the build trick, which is called the Invisible Card, in that book. So that's where you can go ahead and check it out. And the Nth Degree by John Gustafaro. So that's where you have this very simple but still very clean build trick. So you can go ahead and look at all of those different sources. And that was my approach to the build trick while still maintaining the core method, right? So just the simple act of splitting the deck in half and offering it to the spectator, I think makes all the difference, right? Of course, if you have any differing approaches or any additional thoughts, of course, feel free to leave them down in the comments down below. Again, the intent of this two-parter, again, was just to sort of spark creativity and just spark discussion, right? And this was done overall by just like pointing out the flaws in the effect that us magicians would just gobble up without sort of hesitation, without any sort of questioning. So yeah, I do want to point out that this doesn't mean that my approach is better, right? It's never about like which effect, which handling is objectively better, right? It's never gonna happen, right? I don't think my effect is, or my approach to the effect is inherently better than anyone else's, right? So I just think that it's better for me as a performer, as a sort of tinkerer, as a creator, right? I just think that it's better for myself, right? It's never really about which effect is better. It's about which effect is better for you as a performer, right? It's about how you can adapt effects and sleights to better suit your own needs as a performer and as a creator, as a magician, right? So no, I don't think my approach is better. I just think that it's an approach that suits my needs, and it's just another, right? It's just another approach to the hundreds of other approaches to the build trick. Okay, so I don't think it's anything special, but that's just sort of me trying to give some insights into my thoughts and my creative processes revolving around different effects, right? So make sure that you actually just study up and read and learn all of these different build trick approaches, because if you're not a fan of my approach, that's completely fine. There are hundreds of other build tricks out there. If you're not a fan of one particular other build trick, there's also hundreds other ones out there, right? So there's a never-ending sort of supply of different methods and presentations and approaches out there, right? And who knows, maybe by reading those different approaches or watching those different approaches, you get inspired as well, and that you can contribute by adding your own approach, right? You'll never know what you really come across in this vast magical library, right? And you never really know what might inspire you or what theories that might guide you to making another approach, right? So keep reading, keep studying, keep learning, keep thinking and reflecting, and I'm sure that you'll actually get way more value out of that than practicing 1,000 new sleights a day, right? Just being able to think, sit down, just reflect on what you have in front of you, and just think about how you as a performer would approach that, right? And I think that actually gives you a lot more value versus just learning 1,000 different effects, right? But again, no harm in learning like 1,000 different things. I'm a move monkey myself, but sometimes you just need to slow down and think and refine what you have, even though it's the most basic of things, right? Because again, I didn't change any of the core mechanics. It's basically the same effect. I just changed the presentation and how it's handled, right? So yeah, just slowing down and just thinking and refining, I think, goes a very, very, very long way. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for us. This has been the Biddle trick. Both part 1 and part 2 are now up, and yeah, of course, let me know how you approach the Biddle trick. Let me know what you thought of my approach. Let me know anything, right? Again, this whole thing was published with the intent of sparking discussion and creativity and all of those things, right? And so yeah, I think that about wraps it up. Hope you guys have a good one, and yeah, stay healthy, stay safe, keep creating, and yeah, see you guys next time.